The Hells Angels biker saw the little girl cornered beside a rotten stable, and his fury rolled across the fields like thunder. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's dive into today's dramatic tale. I don't know what was running through her mind as she sat behind me on the bike. Her tiny hands gripped my leather jacket tightly, and I could feel her trembling, even through the layers of my gear. The roar of the engine barely cut through the heavy silence between us, the only sound the wind whipping by as I drove. It was like a storm inside me, an overwhelming rush of anger, frustration, and something I couldn't quite place, something that made me want to protect her, even though I barely knew her. I wasn't sure what I expected when I pulled up to the stable, but it sure as hell wasn't this. The sight of that little girl, scared out of her mind, backed into a corner like an animal, had triggered something in me. It was all too familiar. Her face, the look in her eyes, it reminded me of someone. But I didn't have time to dwell on it now. I had a job to do. I had to keep her safe. The road stretched out in front of us, the lights of the town dimming as we left the edges of the woods behind. The girl had stopped crying, but she hadn't said a word since I helped her onto the back of my bike. I kept my eyes on the road, trying to focus, but the weight of the moment pressed in on me. I had been through hell and back in my life, seen things no man should ever witness, and yet, I'd never once felt like this before. As we neared my place, I could feel her eyes on me, studying me from behind her messy brown hair. I wasn't sure if she was scared of me or curious, but I wasn't about to push her to talk. I pulled up to my garage, the same one I had worked in for years, the one that had seen its fair share of blood, sweat, and tears. The old metal sign creaked as it swayed in the wind. My place was small, not much to look at, but it was home. I killed the engine, and the silence fell over us again. "This is where we'll stay for the night," I said as I swung off the bike. "It's safe here." She didn't respond, but I saw her nod. She was probably too tired, too overwhelmed, to speak. I helped her off the bike, and we made our way inside the garage. It was dimly lit, the smell of motor oil and rust hanging heavy in the air, a scent I had grown accustomed to over the years. The old leather couch in the corner looked inviting enough. I wasn't much of a host, but it was better than being out there in the cold. I guided her to the couch and helped her sit down. She winced as she shifted, but she didn't complain. I wasn't sure how much she'd been through, but something told me it was a lot. She looked around the space, her eyes wide, but she didn't say anything. I moved to the small kitchenette area and started making a pot of coffee, not because I needed it, but because I needed something to do, something to focus on. The silence was unbearable. As I waited for the coffee to brew, I glanced back at her. She was sitting with her knees pulled to her chest, staring off into space. I couldn't help but wonder what kind of life she had lived before this, before she ended up in that rotten stable, surrounded by those kids. But I couldn't think about that now. I had to focus on the here and now. "You want something to eat?" I asked, trying to break the silence. She didn't answer immediately, but after a moment, she nodded. I grabbed a couple of cans from the cupboard and heated them up, handing her a bowl. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. She took the bowl hesitantly, her hands shaking slightly as she held it. "Thanks," she mumbled, barely above a whisper. It wasn't much, but the gratitude in her voice hit me harder than I expected. I sat down across from her, watching as she ate in silence. Her movements were slow, deliberate, as if she was afraid to take too much. I wasn't sure what was going through her mind, but I knew one thing for sure. She had been through hell, just like me. And maybe, just maybe, we could help each other find a way out of it. As she finished, she set the bowl down and looked at me. "What happens now?" she asked quietly. I was caught off guard by the question. What happens now? I hadn't really thought that far ahead. All I knew was that I couldn't leave her out there, not after what I saw today. "We figure it out," I said, my voice rough but steady. "One step at a time." I didn't know how or when this would all end, but I knew one thing. I wasn't about to let anything happen to this little girl. Not on my watch. I could tell the girl was starting to relax. Her muscles weren't as tense as before, and her eyes, though still filled with uncertainty, had softened. I wasn't sure how much comfort I was giving her, but I could see she was starting to trust me, just a little. That small flicker of hope kept me going. I had never been good with kids, never really thought about it much, but something about her vulnerability made me want to protect her. The storm outside had only gotten worse as the night wore on, the wind howling through the cracks in the garage, the rain beating against the metal walls. Inside, the atmosphere was thick with silence, the kind that only comes when two people are trying to process everything that's just happened. I try not to look at her too much. She wasn't crying anymore, but she still had that distant look in her eyes. I couldn't imagine what she'd been through, but I could guess. Abandoned by people she trusted. Left to fend for herself. Maybe that was why she was so scared of me at first. She had learned not to trust anyone, and I could see why. But I wasn't like those assholes in the stable. I wasn't here to hurt her. I was here to help. "What's your name, kid?" I asked, trying to break the silence again. She glanced up at me, her brow furrowing as if she was trying to decide whether or not she should answer. After a long moment, she spoke. "Sophie," she said softly. Sophie. The name didn't ring a bell, but it didn't matter. She was just a kid, and right now, all I cared about was making sure she was safe. "Well, Sophie," I said, trying to sound more reassuring than I felt. "You're safe here for tonight. I'll make sure no one hurts you again." Her gaze flickered to the door, as if she expected someone to show up at any moment. I wasn't sure what she was thinking, but I had a feeling she was waiting for the other shoe to drop. "Do you want to talk about what happened back there?" I asked, though I wasn't sure if she'd want to. I'd seen enough trauma in my life to know that sometimes, people just need to be left alone. But to my surprise, Sophie nodded. "They kept saying they were going to teach me a lesson," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "But they were just mean. They were laughing at me, pushing me around. I didn't know what to do." I felt my jaw tighten as I listened to her. It pissed me off to hear that some piece of shit had treated her like that, but I didn't say anything. I just let her talk. "I tried to get away," she continued, her voice trembling now. "But they wouldn't let me. They said I was too weak to fight back." I clenched my fists. That was it. They'd crossed a line. "You're not weak," I said, my voice low but firm. "You're strong. You stood up to them, didn't you? You didn't give in to them." Sophie looked up at me, her eyes wide, as if she was surprised that someone actually believed in her. It hit me like a punch to the gut. This kid had been through hell, and now, here she was, looking to me for something I wasn't sure I could give her. "You're gonna be okay," I said, this time more to myself than to her. "I'll make sure of it." The storm outside continued to rage, but inside, the small space of my garage felt a little warmer. Not much, but enough to make the world. Outside seemed like a distant memory. Sophie didn't say anything for a while after that, but I could see she was thinking. I wasn't sure what went through her head, but I wasn't going to push her. She'd had enough people telling her what to do for one day. After a few moments, I got up and went to the corner of the garage where I kept the spare blankets. "Here," I said, tossing one of the thick woolen blankets onto the couch. "Get some sleep. You've had a rough day." Sophie hesitated for a moment, then nodded. She wrapped herself in the blanket and sat back on the couch, pulling her knees up to her chest again. I could tell she wasn't ready to sleep, not yet, but that was okay. I wasn't going to rush her. I sat down on the workbench across from her, trying to figure out my next move. I couldn't just leave her here, alone, in the middle of nowhere. The roads were too dangerous with the storm, and I didn't trust anyone around here to help. So, I was stuck with her for the night. It didn't feel like much of a burden, though. In fact, it felt right. Something about keeping her safe, making sure she didn't have to face the world alone, made sense. It made me feel like I was doing something that mattered. And for once, I didn't mind the quiet. The quiet felt like peace, something I hadn't had in years. As I sat there, my thoughts started to drift, and for the first time in a long while, I wasn't thinking about the next ride, or the next job, or the next fight. I was thinking about Sophie, and how, maybe, this time, I could do something good. Something that made up for all the bad I'd done in the past. Sophie didn't fall asleep right away. I could see her fidgeting, her eyes darting around the room as if she was still waiting for something to happen. I knew she wasn't going to trust me completely yet, but that was fine. I wasn't going anywhere. Not until she was safe. "You'll be all right," I said quietly. Sophie looked up at me, her eyes filled with a question, but she didn't ask. Instead, she gave a small nod, and for the first time since I met her, I saw the faintest trace of hope in her eyes. It wasn't much, but it was enough. Enough for me to know that maybe, just maybe, I was doing something right for once. I sat there in the quiet of the garage, watching Sophie as she drifted into a light sleep. The storm outside was relentless, but the shelter we had found here in the dimly lit space seemed to hold back the chaos of the world. She lay there, wrapped in the blanket I'd given her, her small frame curled up in the corner of the couch. The steady rise and fall of her chest was the only movement in the room. It was strange. For once, I wasn't thinking about the past, the fights, or the endless roads ahead. I wasn't focused on the demons that followed me everywhere. I was focused on keeping her safe. Sophie, the little girl who had been so scared when I found her, now lay there in peace, at least for the moment. And that was all I needed right now. I wasn't used to this kind of quiet, this kind of stillness. But it wasn't uncomfortable. For once, it felt like the world was giving me a chance to breathe, a chance to fix something. I glanced at the clock. It was well past midnight, and the storm didn't show signs of letting up. The wind was howling outside, and the rain sounded like nails against the roof. It was one of those nights when you felt the weight of everything, when you could almost feel the world pressing down on you. But inside, in this little garage, it was warm, and for the first time in ages, I felt like I could hold something together. Sophie stirred slightly in her sleep, and I found myself watching her, wondering what she was dreaming about. Was she dreaming about the things she had been through? Or was she dreaming of a world where people didn't hurt each other? I shook my head. It wasn't time to think about that yet. I had to focus on keeping her safe, keeping her from the things that had chased her here. I couldn't afford to get distracted. The storm outside raged on, but my mind was set. I had to protect her, and that meant figuring out what had led to her being chased in the first place. Who were those boys? Who had made her so afraid? I needed answers, and I wasn't about to let the storm or anything else get in the way of finding them. As I sat there, deep in thought, the quiet of the garage was interrupted by a faint sound, a low rumble in the distance. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but I knew it immediately. The sound of motorcycles. A low, deep hum that rumbled through the walls of the garage. It wasn't the wind. It was something else. My instincts kicked in. I wasn't sure who it was, but I didn't need to be. I had a feeling it wasn't just a coincidence that I'd found Sophie and now this. I stood up, moving quietly toward the window. I didn't want to wake Sophie just yet, but I needed to see what was going on outside. I peered through the small gap in the window, straining to catch a glimpse of the road. Sure enough, I saw them. A small group of riders, their bikes roaring through the night. They were moving fast, too fast to be just passing through. I couldn't make out who they were, but the way they moved, the way they glided through the night like shadows, it was familiar. Too familiar. My fingers tightened around the windowsill. I couldn't be sure, but something told me these weren't the kind of people I wanted to be dealing with right now. I pulled back from the window and made my way to the back door, taking a deep breath as I stepped outside into the cold night air. The sound of the motorcycles grew louder, the thrum of their engines vibrating in the ground beneath my feet. I wasn't sure if they had come for me, for Sophie, or for something else entirely. But I knew one thing. I wasn't going to let them get close enough to find out. I moved quickly, silently, into the shadows, keeping my distance, but making sure I had a clear view of the road. The storm made it harder to see, but the lights of the bikes gave them away, like beacons in the night. As they neared, I tensed. There were 4 of them, maybe more. The way they rode together, moving as one, told me everything I needed to know. These weren't just casual riders. They were here for a reason. I stayed still, not making a sound, my hand resting on the cold metal of my bike. The last thing I needed was to draw attention to myself. But they weren't looking for me. They were looking for something else, someone else. Sophie. I cursed under my breath. I couldn't let them find her. I had to move, and I had to move fast. But as I turned to head back to the garage, I heard it. A voice. "We know you're in there." My blood ran cold. They had found me. Or maybe they had always known where I was. The storm, the night, none of it mattered anymore. I was about to find out just how far I'd have to go to protect Sophie from whatever came next. I froze at the sound of the voice. It wasn't a shout, but it carried the weight of someone who was sure of what they wanted. "We know you're in there." My heart skipped a beat, adrenaline flooding my system. I turned toward the garage, instinctively moving toward Sophie. I had no idea how they had found us, but I couldn't risk them getting too close. Not when Sophie was here. I glanced over at the back door of the garage and made my decision. The sound of the bikes was growing louder, their engines a deep rumble that seemed to shake the ground beneath me. I wasn't going to let them get to her. I knew I couldn't fight all of them head-on, not without making things worse. My mind raced as I scanned the garage. There was a small back window, just big enough to crawl through. I moved quickly, quietly, making my way to the back of the building. Sophie was still on the couch, her eyes wide open now, staring at me with a look that was a mix of fear and confusion. I crouched down beside her, trying to keep my voice steady. "Sophie," I said quietly, "I need you to stay here, okay? Don't move. Don't make a sound." She nodded, her eyes filled with something I couldn't quite read. I wanted to reassure her, tell her everything would be fine, but the truth was, I didn't know that for sure. I had no idea what I was up against. I stepped toward the window, glancing back one last time at Sophie. She was clutching the blanket tightly, her small body trembling slightly. I hated leaving her behind, but I had no choice. I needed to get outside, find out who these people were, and figure out what the hell was going on. I pushed the window open slowly, careful not to make a sound. The storm outside had intensified, the wind howling and the rain coming down in sheets. It was the perfect cover for sneaking around, and I planned to use that to my advantage. As I climbed out the window and into the wet night, I heard the unmistakable sound of the motorcycles pulling up in front of the garage. My blood ran cold. They were here. I crouched low to the ground, moving swiftly and silently along the side of the building, keeping my back to the wall. I could feel the tension building in my chest as I got closer to the front. My mind raced, calculating my next move. I couldn't let them know I was here. Not yet. I had to figure out who they were, what they wanted, and most importantly, how I was going to keep Sophie safe. The group of bikers had parked their bikes just outside the garage, their headlights casting long shadows on the ground. I crept closer, my heart pounding in my ears. There were at least 5 of them, all wearing the same black leather jackets with the Hells Angels insignia. They were no strangers to violence. That much was clear. I had dealt with their kind before. But this time, it was different. I wasn't alone. Sophie was in there, and I wasn't about to let anything happen to her. As I crouched in the shadows, I heard their voices. "You think he'll come out?" one of them asked, his voice low, almost like a growl. "He has to," another answered. "He won't let a little girl be the reason he hides. It's what they all do. They can't resist playing the hero." I clenched my fists at the sound of their words. They were talking about me. They were expecting me to come out. And that's exactly what I was going to do. But I wasn't going to play by their rules. I wasn't going to just walk into their trap. No, I had a better idea. I waited for a moment, watching them closely. They were standing around, talking, not paying attention to the back of the garage. They didn't know I was there, and that was exactly what I needed. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. I had one shot at this. I turned and sprinted quietly toward the back of the building, moving fast, but keeping my steps light. As I reached the back door, I drew a deep breath and stopped for a moment to collect myself. The plan was simple: create a diversion, lure them in, and then make sure Sophie was safe. I pulled the door open just enough to slip inside, my eyes quickly scanning the room for Sophie. She was still where I had left her, but now, she was sitting up, her eyes wide with concern. I motioned for her to stay quiet, my finger pressed to my lips. "Sophie, listen to me," I whispered urgently. "I need you to go into the back room and stay there. Don't come out until I say so. Understand?" She nodded quickly, not saying a word, but the look in her eyes told me she understood. She got up without hesitation and moved toward the back of the garage, disappearing into the darkness. I turned back to the front, my heart pounding as I set my plan into motion. The bikers were still outside, getting restless. I could hear their voices rising as they grew impatient. I knew I had only a few more seconds before they decided to come inside. I pulled a flare from my bag, lit it, and tossed it through the open window in the back of the garage. It landed with a soft thud, and the bright, blinding light instantly illuminated the room, creating a flare of chaos. I could hear them outside, reacting to the sudden burst of light. Perfect. I grabbed my gear, my muscles tense, ready for the confrontation that was about to come. I wasn't going to let them find Sophie. Not today. Not ever. I could hear their boots crunching against the gravel outside, their voices growing louder as they began to figure out what was going on. The flare I had thrown had lit up the garage, but it was only temporary. I had to act fast. I glanced back toward the back room where Sophie had gone. She was out of sight, but I could only hope she was staying hidden like I told her. My fingers were clenched tight around the handle of my knife, the only weapon I had within reach. My breath was steady, despite the adrenaline pumping through my veins. This wasn't the first time I'd found myself in a fight I didn't want, but it was different this time. I wasn't alone. Sophie was depending on me, and I wasn't about to let these bastards take her. I knew the moment I made myself known, they would come in fast. I wasn't about to let them catch me off guard. The sound of boots scraping the ground outside grew louder. They were close now. The leader, the one I had seen before, stepped into the garage. His eyes scanned the space, and for a moment, they paused on the flare in the corner. The light illuminated his face just enough for me to see the arrogance in his eyes, the sense of entitlement that had followed him through his whole life. "Where is he?" the leader growled. "He can't hide forever." His voice was low, thick with the kind of anger I had heard from too many people over the years. The other bikers started to fan out, their footsteps loud as they searched. I could see the tension in their movements. They were trained, experienced, and they weren't going to leave until they got what they came for. My heart was pounding in my chest, but I stayed still, waiting for the right moment. Then, the leader's gaze shifted toward the back of the garage, where Sophie had hidden. My blood ran cold. They were going to find her. I had no choice now. I stepped forward, my boots scraping against the concrete floor. "You're not going to find her," I said, my voice cutting through the silence. The leader's head snapped toward me, a surprised look flashing across his face before it turned to a wicked grin. Well, he said, his voice dripping with mockery. "Looks like we've got ourselves a hero." I didn't respond. I didn't need to. I could feel the tension in the air, thick and heavy, like the calm before a storm. They were ready for a fight, and so was I. The other bikers spread out, their hands on their weapons, ready for whatever came next. But I wasn't going to let it go down like that. I wasn't going to let them get to Sophie. "You should leave," I said, my voice steady despite the storm of anger brewing inside me. "Before things get worse for you." The leader laughed, a low, harsh sound that sent a chill down my spine. "You think we're just going to walk away?" he sneered. "You're in our world now, and there's no walking away from this." His hand went to his waistband, pulling out a knife. The other bikers did the same, their weapons glinting in the dim light. I didn't hesitate. I knew what I had to do. I charged forward, moving fast, closing the distance between us before they could react. The leader lunged at me with his knife, but I was ready. I blocked his attack, twisting his arm and sending the blade flying across the room. He staggered back, surprised by my speed, but I didn't give him a chance to recover. I moved in again, landing a solid punch to his jaw. He went down, hitting the floor hard, but I didn't stop. I wasn't going to give them a chance to regroup. The other bikers came at me, but I was faster. I disarmed the first one, sending him to the ground with a quick strike to his chest. The second tried to swing at me, but I ducked and hit him in the ribs. He gasped for air as he fell to the floor, out cold. I wasn't looking to kill them, just to make sure they didn't get any closer to Sophie. I turned to the last biker, the one who had been hanging back, watching. He hesitated for a moment, unsure whether to engage or retreat. I didn't give him the chance to decide. I lunged at him, tackling him to the ground, knocking the wind out of him. "Stay down," I growled, holding him in place. He struggled for a moment, but I pressed harder, my knee on his chest. "You won't hurt anyone else." I could hear the others groaning on the floor, but I didn't care. They weren't a threat anymore. I glanced over my shoulder, making sure Sophie was still safe in the back room. She hadn't moved. She was still there, hidden, waiting for me. I slowly stood up, keeping my eyes on the downed bikers. They weren't going anywhere. "You came to the wrong place," I said coldly. "Now get out." They didn't say a word. They didn't have to. The message was clear. They weren't going to challenge me again. I stepped back, watching them slowly crawl away, not daring to look back at me. I didn't care if they were ashamed or angry. I wasn't going to give them a chance to regroup. As they finally left, disappearing into the night, I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. I turned to Sophie, who was now standing in the doorway, watching me with wide eyes. "It's over," I said, my voice softer now. "You're safe." She didn't say anything, but I saw the smallest hint of relief in her eyes. For the first time that night, I felt like I had done something right. I had kept my word. I had kept her safe. I watched them go, the rumble of their bikes fading into the night. The garage was silent now, except for the sound of my heavy breathing and the faint crackling of the storm outside. It wasn't over, not really, but for now, we were safe. I turned back to Sophie, still standing at the doorway. Her eyes were wide, still processing everything that had happened, but there was something different about her now. She wasn't just the scared little girl I found in that stable anymore. She was stronger. At least, that's what I hoped. "You okay?" I asked, my voice softer than I intended. She nodded slowly, her small hands clasped tightly around the blanket she had wrapped around herself. "Yeah," she said, though I could tell she was still shaken. I didn't blame her. We had just fought off a group of bikers, and she had been caught in the middle of it. "I'm sorry you had to go through that," I said, my words a bit too heavy for the moment. "But it's over now. You're safe." Sophie didn't speak right away. She just looked at me, studying my face like she was trying to figure out if she could trust me. And I understood. Trust wasn't something easily given, especially not after everything she had been through. I couldn't imagine how it must feel to have someone like me come in and save you, only for you to realize you're still in the middle of a storm you didn't choose. "Why did you help me?" she asked, her voice small, hesitant. I didn't have a good answer for that. "Because I couldn't let them hurt you," I said, though it wasn't the whole truth. The truth was, I had seen too much pain in my life. I had caused too much pain. I couldn't just walk away from this one. Not from her. "You don't even know me." Sophie's voice cracked, and I could see the vulnerability in her eyes again. She was just a kid, and I was trying to be a protector, but I didn't know how to be that for her. I wasn't used to this, being the person someone depended on. I wasn't sure I was the right person. "I know," I said, "but that doesn't mean I'm going to let anything happen to you." She nodded, the look in her eyes softening just a little. It wasn't a smile, but it was the closest thing I had seen from her since I found her. "Thank you," she whispered. I couldn't help but feel a weight lift off my shoulders. I wasn't alone in this. She might have been scared, but I knew she had more fight in her than she gave herself credit for. I turned back to the garage door, glancing outside. The storm still raged on, but the sound of the rain hitting the roof was strangely comforting now. The worst was over, but the night was far from done. "We're going to need to keep our heads down for a while," I said, my voice steady as I scanned the surroundings. "Those guys might come back, and we can't afford to be caught off guard again." Sophie didn't respond right away. I could tell she was processing everything, trying to piece together the chaos. "What if they come back?" she asked finally, her voice trembling slightly. "What if they try to hurt you?" Her words hit me harder than I expected. I wasn't afraid of those bikers. Not anymore. But the thought of Sophie having to go through anything like that again, it gnawed at me. I didn't have a good answer for her. "I won't let them," I said, the words firm, even if I wasn't entirely sure how true they were. "I'll protect you." I didn't know how much longer I could keep her safe, but I had to try. For her. And for me. We both needed a way out of this, and the only way I knew how to get it was by staying one step ahead. I turned back to Sophie, giving her a look that I hoped was reassuring, though I knew I wasn't fooling anyone. "Get some rest," I said, my voice low. "We've got a long day ahead of us tomorrow." She didn't argue. She just nodded and sank back onto the couch, curling up again with the blanket wrapped tightly around her. I watched her for a moment, making sure she was settled. The last thing I wanted was for her to feel like she couldn't trust me. As I turned to sit down on the workbench, my mind began to race again. There were things I needed to figure out. Who were those bikers? Why had they come after Sophie? And most importantly, what was I going to do if they came back? I didn't have all the answers, but I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going to let anyone hurt her. Not as long as I had breath in my lungs. The storm outside seemed to mirror the storm inside me. It was far from over, and I wasn't going to stop fighting until I made sure Sophie was safe. For good. I woke up to the sound of rain tapping lightly on the roof, a steady rhythm that filled the silence of the garage. The storm had passed, but the air still felt heavy, like the world was holding its breath. I glanced over at Sophie, still curled up on the couch, the blanket wrapped tightly around her. She was asleep, her small chest rising and falling with each breath. For a moment, I let myself relax, knowing she was safe. But that moment was short-lived. I couldn't let my guard down. I had already seen what kind of world she was living in, and I knew it wasn't over yet. I stood up slowly, stretching my stiff muscles, and moved to the window. It was still early, the first light of dawn barely creeping over the horizon. The world outside was calm, but I knew it wasn't the calm before the storm. It was just a lull. I couldn't be sure how much time we had before those bikers came back, or who else might be looking for Sophie. I wasn't going to take any chances. I turned back to the garage and started gathering my gear. I wasn't sure what the next move would be, but I needed to be ready. I had to protect Sophie, no matter what. I wasn't about to let her down. I moved quietly, my boots making barely a sound as I moved through the space. I knew Sophie wasn't fully awake yet, but I still didn't want to risk making noise. I didn't want to scare her, not when she was still adjusting to everything. I had no idea what had happened to her before I found her, but I knew it had to be bad. I didn't want to add to that fear. I glanced over at her again, her face peaceful in her sleep, and for a moment, I felt something I hadn't felt in years, hope. It was a dangerous thing, but it was there. I wasn't sure what it meant yet, but I could feel it in the pit of my stomach. I couldn't keep her locked away in this garage forever. She deserved more than that. But what else could I offer her? The life I had known was nothing to aspire to. I had no answers, no plan, and no way of knowing what the future held. But I couldn't let her face it alone. The weight of that responsibility settled heavily on my shoulders as I stepped outside. The air was cooler now, the storm having washed away the thick humidity of the previous night. The sky was overcast, but it wasn't as bad as it had been. I took a deep breath, trying to clear my mind, but all I could think about was Sophie and the danger she was in. I needed to get her out of here, away from this place. But where would we go? I didn't have an answer to that either. I walked to the front of the garage and stood there for a moment, staring out at the empty road. There was no sign of the bikers, but I knew that could change at any moment. I couldn't afford to wait around for them to show up. I had to move fast. I heard a rustling behind me and turned quickly, my hand instinctively reaching for the knife at my side. Sophie stood there, wide-eyed and alert, watching me. I couldn't sleep, she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. I nodded, trying to hide the surprise in my eyes. I hadn't expected her to wake up so soon. It's okay, I said, my voice as calm as I could make it. I was just thinking. She didn't say anything, just stood there, her eyes searching mine as if she was trying to figure out what I was thinking. I could see the fear in her eyes, the way she was still processing everything that had happened. She was too young for all of this. I had seen plenty of things in my time, but I wasn't used to dealing with a kid. I had no idea how to make this right for her. What happens now? Sophie asked quietly. The question hit me harder than I expected. What had happened now? What was I supposed to do next? I had no plan, no backup, no safety net. All I had was Sophie, and I wasn't going to let anything happen to her. We get out of here, I said firmly. We don't stay here any longer than we have to. Sophie nodded slowly, her gaze still fixed on me. I could tell she was scared, but she wasn't going to show it. That was something I could respect. I don't want to be here anymore, she said, her voice trembling just slightly. It broke something inside me. I wanted to promise her everything would be okay, that we'd find a place where she could be safe. But I didn't know how to promise that. We'll figure it out, I said, trying to offer her some comfort. Just stay close, okay? Sophie nodded again, this time with more certainty. She stepped forward and took my hand, her small fingers curling around mine. It was a simple gesture, but it was all I needed. In that moment, I knew we were in this together. We had to be. Let's go, I said, leading her out into the morning light. We walked together toward the road, the sounds of the world beginning to wake up around us. But I wasn't sure if the world was ready for what was coming next. I just knew I had to keep moving, keep pushing forward. I had no idea what would happen when we left this place, but I wasn't going to. Let Sophie face it alone. I couldn't. The weight of the world was on me now, but I would carry it. For her. I could feel the weight of the road under my boots, each step forward heavier than the last. Sophie held my hand tightly, her fingers wrapped around mine, as if she were afraid I might disappear into the storm. The early morning light was still weak, the rain from last night leaving puddles along the dirt road, but it was quiet now. Too quiet. The world felt like it was holding its breath, and so did I. I didn't know where we were going, but I knew we had to get out of here. It wasn't safe anymore. The bikers, whoever they were, had left for now, but I couldn't afford to believe they were gone for good. Sophie and I needed to find a place where we could lay low, somewhere I could protect her without constantly looking over my shoulder. I glanced over at her as we walked. She looked small beside me, her face still pale, her eyes wide with a mix of fear and curiosity. It wasn't fair. She was just a kid, and here she was, caught up in something she didn't ask for. I should have done more, should have found a way to stop this before it ever started. But I couldn't change the past. All I could do now was keep her safe. "Where are we going?" she asked quietly, breaking the silence. I had to think for a second before I answered. I didn't have a clear plan, not yet, but I couldn't let her know that. "We'll find somewhere safe," I said, my voice steady. "Don't worry about it." Sophie didn't respond, but she gave a small nod. I could tell she was trying to trust me, even though I hadn't earned it yet. She had no reason to trust anyone, but I hoped I could be someone she could depend on. The road ahead was empty, stretching on and on with no sign of life. The few houses we passed were dark, abandoned even. This part of town was quiet, almost forgotten. That was both good and bad. It meant fewer eyes, fewer people to worry about, but it also meant no one to help if something went wrong. We needed a place to rest, a place where we wouldn't be found. And fast. I kept scanning the area, my mind racing for a plan. There had to be a motel, a safe house, something. We couldn't keep walking forever. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw something that made my heart race. An old, run-down diner tucked away behind a line of trees. The place looked abandoned, but there was a light on inside. I stopped for a moment, considering the options. It could be nothing, but it could also be something. Something that could give us the break we needed. I turned to Sophie. "Stay close," I said quietly. She nodded, her eyes wide but determined. We walked toward the diner, and I could hear the soft crunch of gravel beneath our feet. As we approached, I felt a strange tension in my chest, a gnawing feeling that I couldn't shake. Was this the right choice? What if the people inside were dangerous? What if it was another trap? But I had no other choice. I couldn't keep running, and I couldn't keep hiding. Not with Sophie depending on me. The door creaked as I pushed it open, the bell above it ringing softly. The diner was empty except for an older woman behind the counter. She looked up as we entered, her face weathered but kind. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice warm despite the early hour. I hesitated for a moment, unsure of what to say. Should I tell her the truth? That we were on the run? That we were being hunted? Or should I just play it safe, keep it simple? "Just passing through," I said finally, trying to sound casual. "We need a place to rest." The woman nodded, her eyes scanning Sophie for a moment before she turned back to me. "Well, we don't get many visitors around here," she said with a chuckle. "But you're welcome to stay for as long as you need. Just don't expect much. This place hasn't seen a cleanup in years." I let out a breath I didn't realize I was holding. She seemed harmless, but I couldn't afford to let my guard down. "Not yet." "Thank you," I said, stepping further inside. The woman gestured to a booth in the corner, and we made our way over to it. I sat down first, Sophie sliding in next. To me. The woman didn't ask any more questions, which was a relief. She just turned and started making coffee, the sound of the machine filling the otherwise quiet room. Sophie looked around, her eyes scanning the space as if she were waiting for something to happen. "Do you think they'll find us here?" she asked quietly. I turned to look at her, my heart sinking. I hadn't wanted to tell her the truth, but she deserved to know. "I don't know," I said honestly. "But we'll stay here as long as we can. And if we have to move, we'll move. We won't stay in one place too long." She nodded slowly, her small hands clutching the edges of the table. She didn't speak again, but I could see the worry in her eyes. I couldn't promise her that we'd be safe forever, but I could promise her that I would keep her safe for as long as I could. The woman came over with 2 cups of coffee, setting them down in front of us. I took a sip, the hot liquid burning my throat, but it was a welcome warmth. I didn't know how long we could stay here, but for the first time in days, I felt like maybe we had a chance. Sophie and I weren't alone. We had each other, and that had to count for something. I sat in the corner booth, staring at the empty coffee cup in front of me, trying to ignore the nagging feeling that wouldn't leave my chest. Sophie was quiet beside me, staring out the window at the rain still falling in steady sheets. I could feel her unease, the same tension that had settled into my bones. We had found temporary refuge in this rundown diner, but I knew it wouldn't last. The world wasn't going to let us stay hidden forever. The woman behind the counter had been kind enough, but I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just another stop on a road I didn't want to be on. I could tell Sophie was thinking about the same things. She hadn't asked any more questions since we sat down, but the silence between us felt heavy. I glanced over at her, hoping she would look up at me, but she kept her eyes fixed on the window. I wasn't sure how to explain to her that no matter where we went, we'd always be running. That was the reality of this life now. No more peace. No more safety. Just constant movement. I couldn't promise her anything more than I already had. All I could do was keep her safe for now. The woman behind the counter moved back to her place, wiping down the counter as she worked. I couldn't help but wonder if she knew we weren't just passing through. Maybe she saw something in our eyes that told her we were more than what we seemed. Or maybe she was just trying to be nice to two people who looked like they had nowhere else to go. Sophie shifted in her seat, her small hand gripping the edge of the table. I didn't need to look at her to know what she was thinking. She was scared, and I couldn't blame her. I didn't know how long we could keep running. I didn't know how long I could keep protecting her, but I couldn't show that to her. I had to be strong. For her. I took a deep breath, trying to shake off the worry that clouded my thoughts. We'll figure it out, I said, more to myself than to her. Sophie finally turned her head toward me, her eyes meeting mine. She didn't speak, but the look in her eyes told me she wasn't sure if I had the answers either. She was right not to trust me fully. I was just a guy trying to keep her safe, but the world was too dangerous for promises. I wasn't sure what the next move would be, but I knew we couldn't stay here much longer. We needed a plan, and we needed it fast. I stood up, grabbing my jacket from the back of the booth. Come on, I said, holding out my hand to Sophie. We're not staying here. We need to move. Sophie hesitated for a moment, but then she slid out of the booth and took my hand, her small fingers curling around mine. We walked out of the diner and into the damp air, the rain still coming down in heavy sheets. The diner's lights flickered behind us as we made our way toward the edge of town. I didn't know where we were going, but I couldn't stay here. Not with everything that had happened. The bikers would be looking for us. I couldn't trust that this town would stay quiet. We had to go. Where are we going? Sophie asked, her voice small, unsure. I didn't have an answer for her. We'll figure it out, I said, repeating the words I had told myself earlier. We'll find somewhere safe. But I knew deep down that safety was a lie. There was no safe place for us. Not anymore. Not after what happened with the bikers. Not after what I had done. We walked for what felt like miles, the sound of our footsteps lost in the rain. The town faded behind us, and I kept my eyes on the road ahead, trying to keep a steady pace. Sophie stayed close, her grip on my hand never loosening. I could feel her exhaustion, the weight of the night settling into her bones. But she didn't complain. She just kept walking. Do you think they'll come after us? Sophie asked after a long silence. I didn't answer at first. I didn't want to tell her the truth. That yes, they would. That yes, there was no escaping them. I don't know, I said, finally breaking the silence. But we'll keep moving. We won't stop. We came to a crossroads, a narrow dirt road leading out of the town. It was quieter here, but something about the place felt wrong. I paused for a moment, looking around. The road stretched out ahead of us, lined with trees and abandoned buildings. It was the kind of place you'd avoid if you knew what was good for you. But we didn't have a choice. We had to keep moving. I turned to Sophie, who was looking up at me with a question in her eyes. Stay close, I said, my voice firm. And don't wander off. She nodded, and together, we started down the road. We were both running from something, running from the past, running from the bikers, running from everything that had brought us to this point. But I didn't know how long we could keep running. I didn't know how long we could stay one step ahead of the people who wanted to find us. I could feel the weight of the unknown pressing down on me. Every road felt like it led to more danger, more uncertainty. But I wasn't going to stop. I couldn't stop. Not while Sophie was with me. As we walked further into the unknown, I realized something. I wasn't just running for myself anymore. I was running for her. And no matter what, I wasn't going to let anything happen to her. Not as long as I had breath in my lungs. I kept my eyes ahead, walking as fast as I could without breaking into a full sprint. Sophie stayed close beside me, her small hand still gripping mine. We hadn't said much since we started down this dirt road, but the silence felt heavy, thick with the things neither of us could say. The tension in the air was like a live wire, sparking with every step we took. Every little sound felt like it might be the one that would give us away. The wind in the trees, the creak of a distant building, the squish of our feet in the wet dirt. It was all magnified. I kept scanning the shadows between the trees, looking for any sign of movement. My mind raced through every scenario, every possible danger. What if the bikers had found another way to track us down? What if they had already set up a roadblock? What if they were waiting for us at the end of this road, just out of sight, ready to pounce the moment we showed ourselves? I tried to push the thoughts away, but they kept coming back, gnawing at the edges of my mind. Sophie was walking a little slower now, her face pale in the dim light. I could see how tired she was, how worn out from everything we had been through. She was just a kid, but she had already seen too much. I couldn't protect her from everything, but I would keep her safe for as long as I could. I looked down at her, trying to offer a reassuring smile, even though I didn't feel reassured. "We're going to be all right," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. She looked up at me, her eyes wide with concern, but she didn't say anything. She just nodded and kept walking. We came to a small clearing, the trees opening up to reveal a narrow road that ran alongside a few abandoned buildings. It looked like a ghost town, a place where nothing lived anymore. No movement, no signs of life. It was quiet. Too quiet. I stopped, pulling Sophie gently to a halt beside me. I scanned the area, looking for any signs of danger. "This place doesn't feel right," I muttered to myself, my gut twisting in that familiar way it always did when something was off. We had to keep moving, but I wasn't sure if we could trust the road ahead. "Stay close," I told Sophie, tightening my grip on her hand. I took a few cautious steps forward, my eyes darting from side to side. The silence seemed to stretch on forever, and I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. Every crack of a branch, every rustling leaf felt like it could be someone creeping up on us. My hand instinctively went to the knife at my belt, but I didn't draw it yet. Not unless I had to. I kept moving, Sophie still by my side, until we reached the first of the abandoned buildings. The door was ajar, the wood warped and peeling from years of neglect. It looked like the perfect place to hide, but something about it made me uneasy. I motioned for Sophie to stay behind me as I moved cautiously toward the door, pushing it open just enough to peer inside. It was dark, the only light coming from the small crack in the door. I couldn't make out much, but I could smell the decay, the musty scent of something long forgotten. My heart was beating a little faster now, my instincts on high alert. I stepped inside, keeping my back to the wall, my eyes scanning every corner of the room. The floor creaked beneath my boots, and I winced at the sound. It felt like the whole place might collapse at any moment. Sophie was standing behind me, her eyes wide with curiosity and fear. "Stay close," I whispered to her again. I didn't want her wandering off, not in a place like this. We moved deeper into the building, the air thick with dust. The silence was suffocating, and I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't alone. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up as I heard a faint sound. A footstep, maybe. A shift in the shadows. My heart skipped a beat. I spun around, my hand flying to my knife, but the room was empty. Nothing but old furniture, piles of broken glass, and shadows. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my racing heart. It was nothing. Probably just the wind, or a rat. But I wasn't going to take any chances. "Stay quiet," I told Sophie, my voice barely above a whisper. She nodded, her small face tense with fear. I had to be the one to protect her, no matter what. We moved through the building cautiously, checking every room, every corner. But there was nothing. No one. It was like the place had been abandoned long ago, left to rot and decay in the silence. I was about to turn back and leave when I heard a noise, this time unmistakable, a door slamming shut. My heart lurched in my chest. We weren't alone. Sophie's eyes were wide with panic now, and I could see the fear taking hold of her. I wasn't sure who was out there, but I knew we needed to move, and fast. I grabbed her hand and pulled her toward the back of the building, my mind racing for a way out. There had to be another way. We couldn't stay here. Not with whoever was watching us. I could hear the footsteps now, the sound of someone moving in the building, getting closer. My pulse quickened. I wasn't going to let them take her. I wasn't going to let anything happen to her. We had to escape. We had to keep running. I could feel the tension thickening in the air. Every breath, every movement felt like it could set something off. Sophie was right behind me, her small hand clutching mine with a firmness that surprised me. I could feel her fear, her heart racing just like mine. But she didn't say anything. She didn't need to. Her silence spoke volumes. We moved quietly, but every step felt like a loud crash in the stillness of the decaying building. The sound of footsteps from the other side of the building echoed in the distance, growing closer. I stopped for a second, listening, straining to hear any detail that might tell me who it was. I didn't want to take any chances. I didn't know if it was one of the bikers, or worse, if it was someone else entirely. I motioned for Sophie to follow me and led her to a narrow hallway at the back of the building. The walls were damp, the wood warped, and the floor creaked beneath our weight. But we had no other choice. The exit was ahead, but we had to move fast. I pressed my back against the wall, listening carefully, hoping we wouldn't be spotted. Sophie squeezed my hand, her grip tightening with every step, as though she could feel my anxiety. I could feel my heart thundering in my chest, but I wasn't about to let her see that. I had to be the calm one, the protector. I could hear the footsteps now, closer than before. Someone was coming down the hall. I couldn't make out their voice, but I could hear them clearly, their boots scraping against the floor, the sound of breathing, the faint rustle of fabric. Whoever they were getting closer. I motioned for Sophie to stay behind me and pressed myself flat against the wall. We couldn't afford to be seen. I could feel the weight of the moment, the pressure of the world outside closing in on us. Sophie stood silently, her eyes wide but determined. She was scared, I could see it, but she wasn't panicking. She trusted me, and that was something I wasn't about to betray. The footsteps paused outside the door. I held my breath, waiting for the inevitable. Would they come inside? Would they find us? My hand went instinctively to the knife at my waist, but I wasn't sure it would be enough if things went south. I had to think fast. I listened as the footsteps shifted, the person now walking away, the sound fading down the hallway. My muscles relaxed just a fraction, but I didn't move. I had learned to trust my instincts, and something told me we couldn't make a sound. Not yet. I waited a few moments before I carefully pulled back, my eyes scanning the hall for any signs of movement. When I was sure the coast was clear, I slowly turned the corner, leading Sophie with me. We moved quickly but quietly, staying close to the walls. Every creak of the floorboards seemed deafening in the quiet, but I pushed forward, keeping my mind focused on the exit. The end of the hallway came into view, and I could see the faint light from the outside world spilling in through a crack in the door. Freedom. I pushed the door open, just enough for us to slip through. The fresh air hit me immediately, the scent of rain still lingering in the air. We were outside, but we weren't safe yet. I had no idea where we were going. All I knew was that we couldn't stay here. I glanced at Sophie, her face pale but determined, her hand still in mine. We kept moving, stepping carefully over the wet ground, the sound of rain mixing with the distant rumble of thunder. We had no destination in mind, no place to go, but we were moving, and that's all that mattered. My eyes darted around, scanning the area for any signs of movement. The last thing I wanted was to be ambushed. We had to keep moving. I knew we couldn't stop until we found somewhere safe. Sophie didn't say anything, but I could feel her energy, her quiet determination. She was with me, and that was all that mattered. The sound of our footsteps was the only noise around us, and I kept my pace steady, leading Sophie down the road, away from the building. We didn't look back. The world behind us was gone now. We were moving forward, step by step, with nothing but the promise that I would keep her safe. It wasn't much, but it was enough. We had each other. We had hope, and I wasn't going to let that go. I didn't know how long we had been walking. The rain had stopped, but the roads were still slick, and the sky remained heavy, like the weight of everything that had happened was pressing down on us. Sophie was still holding my hand, and we hadn't spoken much. I think we were both processing everything in our own way, not yet ready to put it into words. The world around us was quiet, almost too quiet, but I could still feel that nagging unease at the back of my mind. The bikers could still be out there, or worse, someone else. But we were moving, and that was the most important thing. Sophie was safe for now. We had no idea where we were headed, but we couldn't stop. I had to keep moving. I kept my eyes on the road ahead, scanning the area for any sign of trouble. The town was behind us now, fading into the distance, and the quiet road seemed to stretch out forever. The woods on either side were thick, the trees heavy with the remnants of the rain. It felt like we were the only two people left in the world, but we both knew that wasn't true. Eventually, Sophie broke the silence. "Where are we going?" she asked softly, her voice hesitant, but there was something in her tone that made me stop and look at her. She was scared, and I couldn't blame her. I didn't know the answer either. "I don't know yet," I said, my voice steady but unsure. We'll figure it out. She nodded, looking down at the ground as we walked. I could feel her tension, the weight of everything she had been through, but she kept moving forward. We kept walking. A few miles later, I spotted a small, old building in the distance. It wasn't much, just a tiny cabin by the side of the road, tucked away in the trees. It didn't look like much, but it was something. Maybe it would give us a chance to rest. Maybe we could find a place to regroup. We walked toward it cautiously, my instincts on high alert. I didn't know if it was safe, but we didn't have many options. The door was slightly ajar when we reached it, and I hesitated before pushing it open. Inside was dim, but I could make out the faint outline of a small living space, some old furniture, and a fireplace that looked like it hadn't been used in years. It wasn't much, but it was shelter. I turned to Sophie. "It's not much," I said, trying to sound reassuring. "But it'll do for tonight." Sophie didn't say anything, but she followed me inside, her steps hesitant. I closed the door behind us, and for the first time in a while, I felt a sense of relief. It wasn't much, but it was a place where we could breathe. The silence settled around us again, but it was a different kind of silence. It wasn't the kind of silence filled with tension, waiting for something bad to happen. It was the kind of silence that came with a chance to rest, a chance to heal. We sat down near the fireplace, and I pulled out the small supply of food I had left. It wasn't much, but it would keep us going for a while. Sophie looked at it, then at me, her eyes tired but grateful. "Thank you," she said quietly, the words barely above a whisper. I nodded, not knowing what else to say. "We're going to be okay," I said, though I wasn't entirely sure. But I had to believe it. For her. I watched her eat in silence, and for a moment, everything seemed to settle into a kind of peace. The storm outside had passed, and the night was calm. I let out a breath I didn't realize I had been holding. We were safe for now. But as I sat there, watching Sophie, I knew this was just a temporary respite. I wasn't sure what tomorrow would bring, but I knew one thing. I wasn't going to let her face it alone. We had each other, and that had to be enough. For now, it was enough. The night passed quietly, the only sound the crackling of the fire. I didn't sleep much. My mind kept racing, but I tried to push it aside, focusing on Sophie, on keeping her safe. We'd made it this far. We could make it through whatever came next. The next morning, I woke up early, my muscles stiff from the hard floor, but I was more focused than ever. We had to move again, and fast. We couldn't stay in one place too long, and I didn't want to risk anyone finding us here. Sophie was already awake, sitting by the fire, her small face looking thoughtful. She hadn't said much, but I could see that she was thinking, processing everything that had happened. She looked up at me when I got up. "What now?" she asked quietly. I met her gaze, trying to offer some kind of reassurance, though I wasn't sure what to say. "We keep moving," I said. "We find somewhere else. We'll keep going." She nodded, the same determination in her eyes that I had seen before. We weren't done yet. We still had a long way to go. But for the first time in a while, I felt a sense of hope. A tiny flicker that we could make it. Together.